This is a quick reminder video on how to use the magic loop. You use magic loop if you're working on maybe 2 socks at a time, if you're knitting a sweater, if you're knitting a hat, gloves. You can use it on anything. If you're not comfortable with using maybe 9-inch circulars or say a 16-inch pair of needles. I'm sorry, one circular needle, 16 inches. Basically, if you would rather have more room in your needles, you can use one giant long pair of needles on a 40-inch or maybe a 24-inch cable. And then basically you're breaking what you're working on in the round. You're breaking it in half so that you work on the front side and the back side, but you're still going around in a circle. So these socks I'm knitting from toe up, and I created a reminder video on how to complete the toe portion of these socks all the way from start to this edge before I began doing my plain stockinette, plain old knit rounds. And I'm working on magic loop. When I first saw magic loop in a lot of tutorials, it was very confusing, and I said, I'm not dealing with this, just give me 9-inch circulars. And I love my 9-inch circulars specifically for my sock knitting. But if I want to do 2 socks at a time because I don't want to land on what some knitters call sock island or second sock syndrome, I do 2 socks at a time, but I only have them on my magic loop when I'm doing the foot and the cuff. So when I'm doing the toes and the heels, I take it off because it's just less room for error, less room for me to mess up my tension that I prefer. It's just easier for me if I keep to my toes and my heels on 9-inch circulars if I want to hurry up and get through a pair of socks, and then I can just put the bodies of the foot on the cable needle. And you can do cable work and color work on a cable needle. For instance, if you're doing 2 socks at a time, even if you're doing a hat, you can do cable work and color work on a cable needle. It's just a matter of yarn management and knowing where you're going to put your cables, moving to the next sock, putting your cables in, turning over, and just minding your pattern at that point. So for this reminder video, this is how you use magic loop. So my socks are on. I'm already in progress. My working yarn always comes from the back needle, farthest away from me. You'll be working from 2 balls of yarn, identical in color, unless you want a pair of mismatched socks. But this is one skein that I broke in half and wound it up. What you'll end up doing, just to give a quick overview, again, you'll knit the front this is my front, but I'm currently going through the back of it. So you'll knit the front, you'll flip and knit the back. And you'll keep going back and forth, flipping back and forth as you knit. But it's in the round, even though it looks like you're working flat, you're in the round because you have the connecting side. No break, no gap. It's still in the round. It's just your working front and back sides with a little bit on the side here because of the way it connects. Hope that makes sense. So I'm going to continue with the back, and just to be aware, when you do the flip, your yarn, your working yarn, will also crisscross and flip That means you just turn your work the opposite way to get it to unflip. Otherwise, if you find that your yarn is twisting, just untwist and it'll go back to normal, being two separate working yarns. If you're using multiple colors, that's something totally different. That's just a matter of yarn management. But this is a quick down and dirty basic on how to do magic loop. So make sure that you take your first basically project on the needle. Again, this is specifically for socks. This is technically my first project. This is second project, first sock, second sock. That's what I'm talking about. So I only want the yarn connecting to this sock. I don't want to grab this over here, because obviously if I started knitting, everything jams together and starts knitting together. So I don't want that. So I'm just going to set that over. And I'm going to pick up the working yarn connected to this first sock. Get my yarn on my hand. Pull my project to the tip of the needles. Now, the back needle has my working yarn. Whoops. Back needle has my working yarn. I'm going to pull this needle out so I can work on the front needle. So it's just a matter of pulling, and you can see what's happening. Let me zoom back out. When I'm pulling, you can see the cable is shrinking on the other side because I'm pulling the back needle out. Just be careful, don't pull your back needle all the way out, because what you'll end up doing, this will simply come together on the needle. I'm sorry, on the cable. It'll just close up. And if you are deliberately keeping your stitches separate and evenly, this is a 64 stitch count sock. So I have 32 and 32 on each side. I would just have to go back through and count 32 and pull my cable needle out to split it apart again. So just be mindful, don't pull your back needle all the way out. You want to keep this loop over here. And if you want, you can even keep your wrist in it and work. That way it will grab and you'll never be able to pull the back needle all the way out. It'll grab onto your arm or your wrist. So again, I'm going to grab onto my working yarn for this first sock, and I'm just going to knit across. And to keep these ladders in here, in between the stitches, from stretching out too much, you can push this cable forward and kind of just pinch with your fingers. Get your stitches to the end. Me, I just like to pinch. That way it stays tight. Not terribly tight, but it stays confined. And I just start knitting. That's all you have to do, is just basically pinch, and it goes right on up. Tightens up on its own. See? And now it's all even. Any, uneven, like this little row right here seems to be bubbling out a bit. Once I block these, if I choose to block them, basically, wash them in wool wash, it'll smooth out nice and evenly. I don't always block my socks. I just put them on, wear them, and then I wash them with wool wash, and everything evens out automatically. But if they're gift knits, I will usually block them first. And again, blocking is just washing your socks in wool wash. and then just put them, you know, put them in a towel, roll them up, get as much water out as possible, and then put them on. I put them on sock blockers to let them dry. My sock blockers have designs on them, so they have holes in the wood so the air can get through. Now I've gone to the end of the needle. I'll pull that needle right on out. So got a little bit of a magic loop over here. This is the back of my sock, so just be mindful. I deliberately have the stitch marker here because of the way my pattern is written. But this is the back, so I've gone across the back of my sock. I'm at the end, so this sock is done. Now I'm going to move that working yarn out of the way, and it's already twisted in the back because of whatever it is I did before. Let me fix that. There we go. So everything is separate. I'm just going to move that working yarn out of the way, and I'm going to slide this project into working position. Sorry. Get my yarn on my hand. This is now in working position. My needle is already ready here in front of me instead of in the back. And all I'm going to do is pull a little bit on the left needle. I'm going to pull a smidge on the back cable to give myself a little bit of room. And this is ultimately what it looks like. The magic loop on its own. You get the two bunny ears. That's the magic of the magic loop. So let me get this back into position. I'm going to pinch that a little so I can keep the ladders from stretching out. And I'm just going to knit across. In the last stitch, the last two, I keep kind of tight. I don't pull on them too much. I just want to make sure that I don't get stretched out side stitches. Say that 5 times fast. Okay. So now, there goes my back needle. It's already hanging out of the way. So I've gone across the back. What I'm going to do is, because this loop got tight, because I've already used up the back cable, because I went across, I'm going to hold this tip over here. I'm going to pull this back cable. Because if you accidentally grab the front and start pulling, it's going to pull right through the stitches. So I just pull that back needle. I'm going to pull a little bit on the front. Now, because everything is on its own, this sock is over here, this sock is over here, the working yarn for this sock is here, working yarn for this sock is over here. So I don't get things twisted, or honestly, it's going to twist on its own. But to keep it in order, I'm going to flip towards myself. Now I'm on the front. And the yarn is going to automatically crisscross on its own. So when I go back to the end, I can flip it back and uncross, and I just keep flipping back and forth. But if you end up mixing them up and it just twists, just untwist it. It's no big deal. So I'm going to push everything into working position. Get my hand on the yarn. So for me, this is the front. That's why my little wooden stitch markers are here to show me these are the front of the socks. I'm going to, again, this is the front needle that I need to work to get to the other side of the sock project completely. I want to pull out the back needle because that's where my working yarn is. So I'm going to pull just enough slack so I can manipulate this needle, pinch it so I don't create any stretched out ladders, and just knit. Keep that kind of tight. Keep that one kind of tight and keep on going. And if you hear a background, I have little minions that live in my home called children, so it is what it is. Sorry. And cartoons are playing on the TV. Life is life. Okay, I'm down to my last 2 stitches, and again, I just want to keep them kind of tight. Don't pull on them too much. Okay. Because I'm going to the second sock, I'm going to move this working yarn over and out of my way. Just make sure that you do that. Get it out of your way. And you can see I'm kind of pulling it towards myself and off to the right, because what you don't want is this yarn to find its way under the whole thing, because this will start to crisscross and you'll knit. It'll just get really funky really quick. Don't do it. So just keep your working yarn to the front and to the right to keep it out of the way. Put the second sock into position. Grab its working yarn from the back, which is now simply all on the cable needle. I'm going to pull this left needle out a little bit, stretching out the back cable to give me some wiggle room. Pinch it kind of tight, no ladders, don't want that, and just start knitting. And it may look like, oh no, I've put them together, but I haven't, because I'm not using this yarn. I'm using this yarn for this particular sock. And this is in the front and to the right, away from my needle points. Oops. I wanted to do this reminder video because a friend of mine was asking me about Magic Loop earlier today, and I thought maybe this would help her out if she chooses to try out Magic Loop. Okay, I'm just going to let that back needle drop, pull my project onto the needles so it doesn't fall off this end, hold that needle and pull out the back cable. Or what you can do is definitely get it away, get your project away from this needle point. And since this thing has flipped, meaning it's crisscrossed, I'm going to uncross it, I'm going to flip this way. It just depends on how your yarn is sitting. You can flip it either that way or this way. So to get it untwist, I'm going away from myself. But again, it's just yarn, it'll untwist. So you see how I still have the hanging? Remember, this was on the back before I did the flip. You can just grab everything and just push it. Instead of pulling the cable, you can just push it back into position, because the back needle becomes the front needle every time you do the flip. Working yarn in position, pull the back needle, and then knit across. Pinch so you don't get a ladder, and then just knit. And that's all there is to magic loop. It's not hard. It's finicky at first if you've never done it, but it's not difficult, and it can be helpful when you're especially working on 2 socks and you want to get them both done at the same time. It's helpful if you're working on a hat and you don't feel comfortable working with smaller circumference needles. I'm not a fan of using 2 double points, even if they're flexible with a cable. I'm not a fan of using multiple needles unless it's for socks on heels. I'll use double pointed needles, sometimes on the toes. Well, actually a lot of times on the toes. So again, that yarn can go in the back. I'll pull it to the front, to the right, to get it out of my way. Push this needle into position, grab the working yarn. I've got enough needle slack, so to speak, over here, so I can just start knitting again. Is that tight? Nope, that's what it was. Grab too much yarn. And let me know if anyone does see these little reminder videos, if you prefer a magic loop or prefer 9-inch circulars, or you work strictly on double points for anything. It'd be cool to see what everyone else is using, how everyone else works their projects. Okay. So that's a quick little, you can see it's already untangled. So I'll just flip it towards myself and then put it back into position. And then what was my back needle when I flipped it is now my front needle. Again, what was my back needle, when I flip it and I push it into position, it's now my front needle. And then the front needle right here, this is before I flip. Once I flip, the front becomes the back. But that's a quick little down and dirty of how to do your magic loop. And just remember, you always want to keep your working yarn coming from the back so that you can knit it off the front needle. But when you're not using it, keep it in the back and away. That's all.